Terrence Lynch, CEO of Power Metallic, joins us today. We're joined by a very esteemed CEO of this very interesting company. We're going to be talking about the outlook for precious metals, base metals, and the future of the demand for some of the most critical materials in our society. We're at the Beaver Creek Precious Metals Summit here in Colorado. Good to see you in beautiful Colorado. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, great to be here, David.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
This conference is buzzing with activity, sentiment is high, a lot of optimism, but also a little bit of skepticism for how much further this bull rally we've seen in the precious metals and to a certain extent the base metals complex can run. So I'll just ask you to start the conversation. How far along in this bull cycle are we right now?
I think it's still early days. You know, I don't think the generalist investor has invested yet. So until that happens, you really won't see the full deployment in the metals sector. Still, mostly people are in tech, not in. Like, if you look at the divergence between tech stocks and commodity stocks, it's never been higher. So it's still very, very early days. While we've had a good move here in gold, in particular, and a little bit in silver, still very, very early days in my books.
You say the generalist investor, for the most part, hasn't come into the space yet. So who's been driving up the prices this year?
You know, the mining funds, you know, and the mining investors. So there was enough of those to recognize, hey, things are turning. And then you're starting to see the generalist investors. I was in New York a couple of weeks ago for a non-deal roadshow and saw 10 generalist investors. Hadn't seen a mining guy in like several years. So and after the thing, we weren't raising money, but after the meetings, the broker that brought us around said, "Hey, they all want to invest." Yeah. And I said, "Well, they better get in the market because we're not doing any issue right now." But it was good to see them come out, and I think that's just the start. And that's really the reason to be optimistic. It's still early days, and there's still great values out there in the sector, I think.
How has the conversation between yourself and some investors changed after the Trump administration took place? We know that there's a priority to secure the critical minerals supply chain domestically versus depending on China, which is now the global leader for lithium production, cobalt production, copper refining. And so the U.S. wants to be less reliant on the East. How has that shifted the conversation for you?
Yeah, I think it's been very positive, right? Now, finally, we have a president that talks about mining. Makes prime ministers talk about mining, and all of a sudden, you know, that brings mining into the living room. Really, hasn't been there for a long time. So I think it's very positive, just from an overall tone. And then specifically, we're seeing the U.S. government take direct stakes in companies and unleash their DoD and DOE subsidiaries to do more. So within our space, we're definitely talking with them, and they're being very supportive. And we're looking at a couple of projects with them right now. So I think it's super strong.
Wait, with them? Sorry, who's them?
Department of Defense, and Department of Energy.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah.
Well, you know, with what you can reveal to the public, what does that conversation look like? What are they looking for?
What they're looking for is they're looking for, in one case for us, for nickel powder. We have a joint venture with a company called CVMR, right? Yeah. Actually, it's not I wouldn't call it a joint venture. That was what it'll become. They're doing a feasibility study right now that they're paying for to build a nickel powder plant, for our nickel concentrate that would come out of our deposit in Quebec. As part of that process, we were looking at building a nickel powder facility in Texas and Kansas City. So that's that conversation. It's early days. I mean, when we used to be called Power Nickel, and then when we made the great, copper precious metals discovery that sort of made us the top performing mining stock last year in Canada, we sort of changed the name to Power Metallic to better reflect what the overall business is. But while we were in the nickel phase, we made this agreement with CVMR on the making nickel into nickel powder. So just to give you an example, nickel is maybe, call it $16,000 a ton. Nickel powders get $40,000 to $60,000 a ton. So you want to be, if you're in the nickel business, you want to be in the nickel powder business. So we're that's another, like I call it, offshoot. Our core business is, advancing this orthomagmatic discovery and building that out. But one of the side businesses we have is we have made big inroads on the nickel powder business, and we'll see where that evolves.
Just on that note, and we'll come back to the markets, your company is currently trading at $1.43. About a year and a half ago, not even, it was at 20 cents. What happened in the last year?
So last year at this conference, we were at 55 cents. A year before that, we were at 20. Yeah. So we basically have executed on the drill bet. at the end of the day, how you create value in mining is finding more metals in the ground that are actually commercially viable. So we found, I think, a lot, and we think it's early days. We basically tripled last year. We think that's highly likely we could do the same thing this year, all on the basis of executing, advancing more minerals in the ground by publishing assays showing that there's more discoveries that have adding to our currently already known. I think when we raised that money last February, and it's still a very tough mining market, we got it because I think the investors, and these were like the leading mining investors in the world, felt that we were cheap relative to our peers, and they felt we had a lot of asymmetric upside on our exploration. So those are the two reasons.
Who are your major shareholders?
Robert Friedland and Rob McEwen were big participants in the last two rounds. Gina Reinhardt. We have 15 billionaires in the deal. I'm the biggest shareholder. I've been also other than Robert Friedland, the second biggest check writer in the last 2 years. So I think management's got serious skin in the game, which is obviously comforting for investors. So those are the primary shareholders.
What do they see in this project that other projects don't have?
So we have what's known as an orthomagmatic nickel-copper PGE discovery. So there's been 20 of them in the history of the world. All previous 20 have become major mines, producing with 1 million tons of contained metals, in some cases more than 10 million tons. So analysts say today we're probably between 300 to 500,000 contained tons in the ground. Are we going to get to the 1 million tons, or are we going to get more? It looks very likely. There's an interesting chart in our deck that you can go to on our site, powermetallic.com, and there's a triangle there where we sort of look at these discoveries they're either more nickel-y, more coppery, or more noble metals, PGEs plus gold, silver. So we're sort of in the middle, and interesting observation is that for every ton of copper sulfide you find on these deposits, you'll find on average 5 tons of nickel sulfide. So right now we're about 1.5 tons of copper to 1 nickel, soon to be 2 copper to 1 nickel. That's because while we're finding a lot more copper, we're eventually going to find a lot more nickel. So this thing's going to get big. So I think people sort of thought, hey, we're buying it cheap, and they got all this exploration upside. Let's give them the money to find it. So now that's what we're doing.
A lot of miners I've spoken to are frustrated with permitting times in Canada. If you're operating in Canada, how are you mitigating these issues?
Yeah, so we've been lucky. Permitting has been very swift for us. So we've been drilling and getting permits back within weeks. No issues there at all. Going forward, if you were to pick one jurisdiction in Canada to be located in, it would be Quebec, and it would be northern Quebec. So we feel like it's very feasible. Why? Just because they're very pro mining, and they're very experienced. So it's been built to help miners out. They've got a lot of infrastructure and programs to do that. One of the big pluses we've got is we could drive off of Route North right to our site, right to the rig. We're 8 kilometers outside the town of Namaska. It's got an airport. It's got facilities for our crew. Yeah. So the James Bay Cree are literally probably the best First Nations in the country that to have as a partner in the project, because they're very pro business, very pro mining. So we've got a lot of good things going for us in that respect. So I know there's problems in other areas of the country, but thanks God for us, we're not in Quebec.
Well, I want to talk about the future of the industry. So in the last 10, 15 years, one of the biggest stories, if not the biggest story behind copper demand, was the rise of China. With the China construction boom, we saw unprecedented demand for copper and the base metals. What does the next 20 years look like?
So I think that was an interesting story, and it's still continuing on. I think India is sort of carrying on in that footsteps as well. But I think that the primary driver for copper will be electrification, right? So generally speaking, 5 years ago, if we had this conversation, we would not be talking about AI. And now it's going to be 15% of the world's power demand, maybe more. So you're starting a 3 Mile Island to sort of basically provide for AI. Energy everywhere needs a lot more copper. So, copper is generally considered doctor economy. So, if there's a recession coming, copper should go down. This time around, the energy demands are going to be so, I think, exaggerated for the needs to build distribution, to build infrastructure, that copper is the backbone of. And, the copper supply is going to get tight. Prices are going to go north.
Where does platinum fit in that future? Platinum is, one of the primary sources, or uses of platinum, rather, is in catalytic converters. The electrification of the world potentially means more EVs. and less need for catalytic converters?
Yeah, so I mean, I think electrification means we need to use all forms of energy. I don't personally believe that the oil and gas is doomed. I think oil and gas is having a renaissance because we recognize now we need this energy. And so I think the concept of there was going to be 50% EVs on the road by 2035. I think people realize that's not happening. So if you look at the supply and demand curve for platinum and palladium, last 3 years, bigger demand than supply. They've been basically what's kept the prices low is the Russians have been sort of flooding the market to finance the war.
Right.
But if you see that coming to any sort of conclusion, plus their supplies are dwindling, I mean, you already saw this year the PGEs had a pretty good run. And remember, historically, platinum and palladium used to be priced at or around gold. So it's like it's the most undervalued commodity out there. Several analysts are calling it for it to be a really breakout performer. And for us, it's effectively a freebie. We got the second best PGE discovery in the planet, and it's in our copper discovery. So it's a cool sort of situation.
What happened to palladium this year? Why did it go up 50% in a couple of months?
Just demand. So the bottom line, it's a demand-driven thing. They started to shut some of the mines down in South Africa, and I guess some of the supply probably stopped oozing out of Russia, and then pricing responded.
What demand from what exactly?
Oh, so again, generally speaking, catalytic converters are for both platinum and palladium are the big driver.
Right.
Hydrogen now is also going to be there, but generally speaking, I would say there's certainly a jewelry aspect and a sort of a precious metal aspect to buying that. And I think I think people are maybe priced out at gold, thinking, hey, gold's a bit toppy or heavy, and maybe I should buy some precious metals, but maybe I should buy the cheaper one on the deck.
Sure.
So I think there's been a bit of that. So I think those are the fundamentals.
Let's just paint a picture for the generalist audience watching here. How reliant is the U.S., the world's largest market, on foreign suppliers for critical minerals? The U.S. wants to continue to be the leader in technology, electrification. Can they do that on their own?
I gave a speech at the Critical Mineral Institute called Fortress America, and I believe that's what's taking place. And I think ultimately Mexico and Canada will be in that fortress as pillars, and they need Mexican and Canadian supply of critical minerals for sure. They need Africa. I mean, China's done an amazing job of getting in front of everyone, the Belt and Road Initiative, and they've done it. You got to give them credit. They've got most of the processing capabilities in critical minerals. So America's got to play catch up. And the one thing with America, when they get focused on something, they turn it on big time. So you're seeing that now. They're using executive orders to get stuff done. They're going to move fast, and it's interesting to see how quick they move. So I think that's very bullish for us miners, and I think it's bullish for America.
Well, at the same time, they're tariffing Canada and Mexico and kind of driving this rift between.
Yeah, I mean, not in mining, right? I mean, in mining, it's not the same. It was interesting. I was literally in Washington, D.C. on Freedom Day when Secretary Bessent started with the tariffs, and I was in
early April.
I was in a conference where he was speaking with the head of the Carlyle Group. And it was pretty interesting. The Carlyle Group guy went at him pretty hard. And he basically said, look, from his perspective, he's saying, look, America had to try something new. The old way was not working. We're going farther and farther behind. So he says, will this work? We think it will. We're pretty confident it's going to work. But we felt we had to try it. And, I think people were skeptical, and maybe some remain. But it's interesting so far to see how it's unfolded. So, I don't know. Jury's out. I think they're doing a lot of the right things. I mean, listen, Canada need a wake-up call. I hope the new government responds. We need to get our act together. I mean, do you know in Canada last year we only raised $20 billion? We used to raise $100 billion all the time. Our capital markets are in disarray because we allow naked shorting and all sorts of spoofing and all sorts of malfeasance.
What needs to happen for policy changes?
You basically have to change the capital markets. You got to the number one thing you got to do is you got to stop the short market exempt. That's what enables market makers and hedge funds to basically flood the market with phantom shares. They don't really exist, but they can suppress the market with that. They got to stop that, and it's crazy, but that's the market we're in. But
specifically, what does the government need to do in Canada to make it more mining friendly?
So you know what? What's interesting, and I was up meeting with the PMO maybe in Ottawa about 4 weeks ago, and having this type of conversation with them. They've got a lot of good programs. Honestly, what they have to do, permitting wise, they need to streamline it. So having two lines of permitting, Fed and province, makes no sense. Just have one. That would be one big thing. Second thing is fix the capital markets, because the governments can only do so much. The capital markets have to reward good projects by bidding them up, making them easier to get access to capital, and punish bad projects, just like normal capitalism should work. Right now, that's not happening, and that's a problem, and that's why our capital markets have been so down. Now, this commodity boom, ordinarily, these stocks would be much higher, much higher. And it's because the generalist investor has stayed out because he's getting punished.
One concern an investor might have, maybe you can address this, is if the government takes stakes in critical minerals companies, wouldn't that make running the company a little less efficient? Wouldn't management have less of an incentive to optimize? I'm
not a big advocate for government taking direct stakes in companies.
Yeah.
I'm a big advocate for the free market.
Sure.
Let's sort the free markets out. I just said as an example, America recognized in a couple instances for the I think the rare earth magnets as an example, probably the most relevant case in lithium, where they felt they had to make a move to get some supply. So they made that. Do I see them investing in copper companies like, companies like Power Metallic? No, I don't see that. But do I see them providing through the DOD or the DOE offtake agreements that are at higher than market prices for offtake in order to encourage investment? Yeah, that's much more constructive. That's what's going to happen.
What's the future of your company going to look like in 5 years?
So I think we'll have a mine running at NISC, and I think it'll be one of the great mines in the world in terms of being able to probably pay itself off in a year. And I think it's going to run for a long time. I think the NISC mine will be the first of many up there. We believe we found a district. This is not just going to be a one mine thing. Sudbury has 33 mines. We think this new district that we found is going to have a lot of mines. We think we'll have some of those. Will we be the operator? Probably not. But I think we might well be the joint venture partner. We are really good at exploration. Yeah. We think we could bring in a partner to maybe build it. I mean, if we get some crazy asymmetric offer to take us out that pays us for what this thing is worth in production, we'll look at that because we're investors. We don't look only for investors. But I think there's a pathway for us becoming a very reasonable and responsible cash flowing producer and explorer that continues to find great projects the world over.
Yeah. Well, tell us about your background. Do you have experience as an operator?
No.
Yeah.
No. So that's why we would definitely we recognize what we can do well and what we don't do well. So that's why I say that. Anyway, in conferences like this, you meet a lot of operators that come to us and say, "Hey, we like what you're doing. Think about us when you're moving forward." And we're at the stage where, obviously, we got 40 plus million in the bank. So we're
why do you need as a strategy? Sorry, I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah. So at some point when we over the next sort of 18 months, in the midst of this 100,000 meter program, we're going to start to define how big this thing is. And then it'll determine, how big it is and how rich it is will determine what size of plant you should optimally build. And that sort of determines, what sort of CapEx you're going to have, and that determines who should your partners be. If you're building a monster porphyry in Chile for $5 billion, there's only a few companies that can fit that bill. Okay, yeah. But if you're building a situation in Canada for $500 million, there's a lot more.
If you were to consider the alternative, I don't know if this is an alternative, but let's say you don't need a partner with anybody, no JVs needed, you just raise money, hire management that does have experience as an operator, would that be an option?
It's an option, we expect to hire people like that, even to guide us on the process of whether building ourselves, partnering with somebody else, or going alone. So that's in our plan, is to hire some operating people, for that very reason. But I would say that look at Robert Freeland. Nobody saw him being a builder. Turns out he's the best builder on the planet. Right. So could it happen for us? I guess it could.
So I've talked to some juniors where they've assessed that the cost to build out a mine is greater than the market cap currently. So in that situation, what would you do?
Well, the good news for us is that because it's critical minerals, we get half of it would be basically funded by the provinces and the federal government, okay? So you got that going for you. You do a feasibility study, this thing will probably pay out in, I'm guessing, a year or 18 months. It's going to be super high IRR because it's so lucrative. So when you have such a massive amount of cash flow, funding it's going to be, as long as people can believe in the builder and operator, then you can raise that capital. So it's not going to be a case where we can't raise the dough.
Yeah, and going back.
It's not going to be a marginal project.
Going back to your share performance, 20 cents a share 2 years ago to 143, and not the majority of your deposits is not gold, right? It's
Right.
That's only about 25% or so.
Even less.
Even less.
10%.
And so most of that value is driven from what you've been doing on the ground, not from the prices of the metals themselves, because
Right.
copper doesn't go up 300%.
No.
So walk us through that process.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, we started off as a nickel deposit, had 3.1 million tons.
Yeah.
And then in looking for more nickel, we stepped out 5.5 kilometers away to what we thought was another nice nickel target, drilled it, and found this massive copper precious metal
Right.
zone. So that was God's luck. We drilled it for the right reasons, but we had no idea that was there. And then when we found it, we realized, holy cow, we've got this a polymetallic. And then we sort of looked and said, hey, we don't really have the expertise on a polymetallic discovery. Who does? And we sourced this guy. His name is Dr. Steve Beresford. He used to be chief geo at First Quantum, and then he was chief geo at first at MMG, and then he was chief scientific officer at IGO. So 3 successive multi-billion-dollar success stories. I reached out to him. He became an advisor, came over to the site, and started giving us some phenomenal input. And we realized, well, this guy, he's not the top polymetallic guy in the world. He's in that conversation, and he knows a hell of a lot more than we do. So we said, hey, man, we got to have you. And we made a deal. So he's now on our board. He's I would say, our thought leader on the exploration side. And then we paired him. He's a Western mining training guy. So we use GeoVector, which is one of Canada's top 2 or 3 geological consulting firms. Tons of great, geos and geophysicists. And they have the ability to, run massive drill campaigns effectively and deploy it properly. So they're a senior guy, Joe Campbell. He's our VP of exploration. He's also a Western mining trained guy. So we got these 2 Western mining trained guys. Western Mining is an iconic, like an Inco type company. They became part of BHP, but they're considered one of the great thought leaders in mining. They run things the right way. So these guys are now running the programs for us, and we've drilled very successfully. We've used top tier technology. We spent a lot of money on tech, and we've executed with the drill bit. So our key learning thing has been from Steve is that with this type of deposit, you can use a technique called borehole EM, which is an EM electromagnetic sort of pulse that you can send down the drill hole, and it gives you a radius of 150 meters to where the sulfides, where the minerals are around. So we've used that very successfully. It's not always successful, but in some deposits it is. It's been super successful for us. So that's what led to our great success with drill bit. And that great success with the drill bit is what drove the stock price.
Did you just close financing recently?
In February of last year, we raised $50 million.
Okay, and what have you done so far with that cash?
We've started a 100,000 meter drill program. We're about 20,000 meters into it. We'll report on that next week. The first phase. Assays were slow because everyone's been drilling like crazy and they're jammed. But we'll get some out next week. And then the other thing we did is we more than tripled our land package in the area because our vision was we don't think this is going to be a onesie. We think there's going to be multiple mines here. So we needed much more land. So we made a deal and acquired more than tripled our land package immediately around us. And so we're super bullish on that. We're exploring on that right now. And we got 4 rigs turning. Soon to have 5. 5/5 is there today. We'll have the 6th after mid-October. So it's a busy time for us.
With precious metals prices at all-time highs, I'm talking about gold specifically right now, and sentiment pretty good compared to a couple of years ago. As you know, it was kind of quiet a couple of years ago. I'd imagine explorers are pounding the table asking for money right now. Is that what's happening?
I would think so. I mean, we're obviously not in that mode, so I don't really know, but I know from talking to a few guys that their deals are getting done. I think the good projects are definitely getting funded. I don't think it's really broken down. I still see.
Would you issue equity right now at $1.43?
No, I would not. We got $40 million in the bank. We got that money to execute on our strategy. We think we should be double, triple our price from where we're at based upon our peers. So we got to get there first.
All right, great. Well, so what's the next milestone for you?
I think the next milestone, well, obviously we got the assays out, so we got to keep on growing the resource. So, what we do is we post all of our drill collars, azimuths, and assays, so people can model this deposit themselves. This is sort of like what Great Bear did, what Filo did, so that when deposits are growing really quick, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself with a 43101. You want to let the thing grow. So what we are doing is we are doing a full metallurgical study, which will show how we'll basically be able to make them payable. Sometimes with polymetallics, that's a concern. It's not a concern with us. We just issued a preliminary sort of finding on that to show that we think 93 or 94% of the goodies, the minerals, will report to the copper concentrate, which is what you want to hear. But we'll get that metallurgical study done and out probably early Q1 of next year, and then they can plug that into their model. So what will happen is we'll continue to advance the drills. I would say this summer we didn't drill our A targets because we were trying to negotiate on the land that was close. Now that we've got all the land, we're drilling our A targets, so I think that we're super stoked about even what we had done. We're happy with, but we're super stoked about what's coming. So we think we're sitting on the start of a really big run for us. So we're super excited. We don't have to raise capital. Lots of news in a macro environment that's getting healthier. Good times.
Okay. One final question: what would need to happen in the world, geopolitically or perhaps policy-wise or market-wise, that would make you dramatically change your strategy or timeline?
I mean, you're looking at some sort of all-out war scenario, I guess. I mean, at the end of the day, the materials that we're finding would be needed in almost any circumstance. So we've got the capital to do that. We've been given a mandate to do that by our shareholders. I really can't think of anything that would change the strategy.
Realistically, how long would it take to put this asset into production?
4 to 5 years.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, the one notable thing about the polymetallics discoveries, like the previous 20, is they get put in production very quickly. The reason why the IRRs are so high, you don't have to de-risk as much. If you're building a $3 billion facility and you got a 32% IRR, well, there's a lot of risk there. You better be sure that everything is in there. But when you're doing something that's got like a 100% IRR or something in that order of magnitude, not so much risk.
Some companies face going back to the problem earlier with dilution, right? They have to raise a lot of money to be able to finance a transition from exploration to production. What's your strategy for mitigating that risk?
Yeah, I think our view is that you always want to keep ahead of the capital requirement, right? So last year when we raised the $50 million, we had like 10 or 12 million in the bank or something like that. So we already, we didn't have to raise it at that moment. We raised it because it was opportunistic to do it at that time. So I think you always have to be opportunistic. So I think, we think we've got a lot of great news that should result into a movement for a stock. We're going to list in New York shortly in October. That's going to be a major movement for us to get listed on the major exchange. The Americans are really starting to get into mining now. We've had some positive experiences there. So we think there's going to be a re-rating on the thing. And then once it re-rates, I think you'd be opportunistic, and you probably, somewhere out there, you'd hit the bid again and raise capital. So you always keep in front of it.
Have you done a feasibility study? How much would it cost roughly to put this thing into production?
Haven't done a feasibility study. That will be something we'll certainly put a resource out end of next year and maybe a PEA.
Sure.
We'd expect something in the neighborhood of $500 million.
Sure.
Again, we think half of that's going to get funded by the government. So 250 is not a big number. I mean, it's a big number, but not crazy, not like billions.
Just on that note, when it gets funded by the government, what do they usually ask for in return?
Nothing. It's just in the tax code. So basically, it's a tax credit.
They don't take equity stake. They don't take royalties.
No, they get ultimately they're getting these projects built, which is in their strategic initiative, right? They know they're getting a lot of employment. There's royalties they get. There's taxes they get. So that's their payback. It's a public policy like they have in many other sectors.
Great. All right, we'll put the link down below. So make sure to follow Parametallic there. Thank you very much, Terrence. Appreciate talking.
Thanks, David. Cheers, man. Bye.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and continue our coverage at the Beaver Creek Conference.